right, we're back for episode 9 of IT Coach for Business Leaders. I'm Josh Davis, Marketing Director at InfoSystems, and with me is Aaron Swann, Virtual CIO for InfoSystems. How are you today, Aaron?
I'm doing well. How about you, Josh?
Doing good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So for the past couple of episodes, we've talked about backups, and obviously critical component of IT, and we talked about disaster recovery and all of the things that you need to have in place to overcome some type of disaster to your company. Maybe it's just a hardware failure. Maybe there's a weather event that wipes out your facility, and there's varying levels of infrastructure, procedures, strategies, and everything that needs to take place to overcome those things. I thought I would bring up, to get a discussion started today, something that happened to me at a previous job where I experienced some data loss, and maybe you can help me relate that to a backup strategy and how that could have been overcome. So the issue was, this was a few years ago, and it was at a point in time where Microsoft was going through some changes with their technology, like that ever happens. But
not since yesterday.
In the early Windows 10 days, and there was this kind of dividing line between the personal Microsoft software, OneDrive, and all of the things that are associated to your personal account, and then the business version of all of those things, Skype for business, OneDrive for business, et cetera, et cetera. And they were going through this weird phase of transitioning people over from one to the other, and in that process, I had most of my data that I used on a daily basis backed up to OneDrive. And so I had a lot of, in marketing, a lot of art files, Photoshop files, Adobe Illustrator files, and stuff that I was using for graphic design purposes and website design files. And in the process of those weird Microsoft things happening, I tried to log into OneDrive one day, and there was nothing there. Absolutely nothing. And so, that sense of panic came over me, and that was when I logged into the web version of OneDrive.
Okay.
And so then I opened up my File Explorer, where the local copy of the files were supposed to reside, and that was empty. So somehow what had happened was the local copy on my hard drive, on my PC, had gotten wiped out, and those changes got replicated to the OneDrive cloud, where it said, oh, this person must want to get rid of their entire... And so all of my files were deleted.
Yeah.
Now, luckily, our IT admin was able to go into a trash folder and recover some things, but some things were not recovered because a latest version had not been synced from my personal computer to the cloud. But the last synced version in the cloud I was able to recover, but I lost a lot of data. Now, from what you've been saying, we should have had a backup policy in place, and that was not with InfoSystems. Let me put the disclaimer out. That was with the previous employer, but there should have been a backup policy in place that would have protected against that type of failure.
Well, I'm sorry, Josh, that you had to go through that. I guess the good thing for us about you having gone through it is that's an excellent story that illustrates a couple of key points that we should make. And we talked about last time, I think, that not confusing replication or archiving with backup, right? So we use the example of the business that's replicating from between multiple sites, that if you do that, if you lose one, if someone deletes a file here, it gets replicated everywhere. So it's not true backup. I will say this is a similar but different scenario, and that is you're using a public cloud service, you know, OneDrive, and you actually use the terminology, and I do it too. It's easy to fall into. You said you had your files backed up to OneDrive. Well, no, really you didn't have them backed up.
Yeah.
You had them stored
Right.
in OneDrive. OneDrive does replicate, and it replicates from your local copy up to probably multiple Microsoft servers spread out across the globe. So you had some protection there from, you know, natural disasters or hardware failure, that type of thing. What you didn't have protection for is human error, you know.
Right.
So we don't know what caused it. It could have been, you know, it could have been a Microsoft thing that someone there made a mistake when they were transitioning between human or between home and business. It could have been that you wiped out the files inadvertently and didn't realize it, and that change replicated up. So it does bring us to mind. So one, if you're using any of those public cloud services like OneDrive or Dropbox or a host of others that are out there, don't confuse that with backup. It's not backup, it's replication. It does provide some level of protection, but not a full protection. The other thing I will say is it does bring to mind the need for cloud-to-cloud backup. So if your business is using any number of cloud products, so we'll use OneDrive as an example. Let's use a couple other Microsoft products, Office 365 email hosting, or Office 365 SharePoint online. You may have a number of things stored there. It is vitally important that that data also gets backed up and not just trusted only to Microsoft servers, because again, that doesn't give you human protection to get someone going in there, or you being hacked. Someone gets your password, goes in, wipes out all your email, wipes out all your OneDrive, your SharePoint. So again, you need to have a offline backup of that. And those services do exist, and there are a number of companies out there that will provide what we term a cloud to cloud. So it's taking a copy of that data, it's backing it up, stored in a place that's not accessible to users, so that we have a secondary copy, and then it's replicated to other places. So yeah, that's a vital portion, and one we're seeing more and more need for as more businesses are moving a portion of their data into the cloud.
Yeah, I would assume with the explosion of cloud-first platforms like Office 365, but I mean, all types of software packages are software as a service now, where you're just entrusting all of the data to the software provider. And I guess as that becomes more and more prevalent, you need to look at how to protect against something that may be a failure on their end or on your end.
And I think that's key. You know, we've defined cloud as your data stored. You know, sometimes we think of it's in this mystical place. It's really just on someone else's data center, sitting in, and maybe they know what they're doing. Hopefully they know what they're doing, but they're humans too. They make mistakes. You know, things happen, and so the old adage about not putting all your eggs in one basket still holds true. You need to have protection and back that up as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, kind of to segue in from that to our main topic, today you were going to talk about some of the best practices, some of your recommended solutions that may not apply to every single company out there because of their unique situation, but sort of a one size fits most, as you yourself put it, that this is something that if most companies did, they would protect against, or they would have a very effective backup in place. So talk about the kind of the infrastructure, the technology behind what your recommended solution usually is.
Right, so you know, we discussed previously physical backups, right, that are being copied to a hard drive or a tape or something. We talked about those as one type of backup. We talked about cloud backup strategies that are, you know, you're sending your data off to someone else's data center. What I like to recommend is a hybrid solution that exists between those two worlds and gives you the pros of both, and hopefully lacks the cons of both of those by themselves. So the solution that we a lot of times recommend, have this deployed at dozens of customers now, is we'll go in with an appliance that's designed as a backup appliance. So, and right now, let me clarify, I'm talking about mostly data that is still stored locally on premise for a company. You know, if it's up in a cloud solution, that's another discussion, right? So we need to have cloud-to-cloud backup services. But most companies do still have some form of on-premise data that they need to protect. So we would bring in an appliance that is designed to, all those systems can connect to it and back up their data to it. It's stored there. One of the nice things about these appliances, they're designed to be apathetic about what kind of data that is. So previously with software, you know, we might have to buy a separate license for file data and exchange data and SQL data. You know, I might have to buy all types of different licenses for that. Typically with this type of model, don't care. All I care about is those systems are sold based on capacity. How much data do you have?
Okay.
Don't care about the source. Is it coming from a server? Is it coming from a workstation? Is it coming from a SQL database? It doesn't matter. It's just what's that total capacity. We can set this appliance down in the system. It's going to take backups from all those systems, store it locally. So that local copy gives me some key advantages. One is, well, backups don't take as long, right? Because it's all traveling over my local area network. Restores can be lightning fast as well. So that if I do have a big disaster, you know, I have a hardware failure, server fail or something, I can get that data back quickly as opposed to streaming it down over an internet connection. But then, once that data is backed up on that appliance then turns around and replicates up to a cloud server, which in turn will replicate to multiple sites. So I'm getting multiple copies of my data. I'm getting it off-site. I have, you know, one of the things we talked about last episode was the idea of taking human hands out of this process as much as possible. So this can all set to be done automatically. The backups happen automatically. The replication happens automatically. Yes, that first replication is going to take a few days probably, but even then I can mitigate against it. Some of these sites will let me seed the data by sending them a copy, you know, through a postal service or something like that. But then subsequent replications that happen on a nightly basis can just take, you know, literally an hour or less, you know, depending on the size of the data that company has. So this gives me some really nice protection because I've got all the benefits of local copies for speed, but I've also got the protection factor of having offsite copies in multiple cloud data centers, hopefully even around the globe, so that if something happens to my whole building or all my infrastructure, I can get that data back.
So you mentioned that this is being replicated on or backed up on site, then replicated to the cloud. So let's say in the case of a hardware failure, if a server dies and you're able to replace that server with a new one, what's the process of getting the backup restored onto the server? How long would that take from the on-site component? Or what if the on-site component failed and you needed to get something back from the cloud?
Sure, so a couple different scenarios there, and there's multiple answers to that question as well, depending on the circumstances. So let's take the example of you had a storage failure on your server. I just need to copy data back. Well, how long it's going to take? Well, it depends on how much data, right? But it can happen very, very quickly. It's literally you're copying hard drive to hard drive over a gigabit or faster network speed. So it can happen at fast speeds. Beyond that, though, a lot of these appliances even have the ability to serve as an in-place storage system for a server. Meaning, instead of having to restore my data, I can, on a temporary basis, if I can get a server, you know, let's say I had a server that the hardware fine except for the hard drives, right? It's the hard drives that failed. And what's the most common thing to fail? Hard drives. You know, that is the most common failure point. So let's say my motherboard, my RAM, all that's up and running, but it's my storage that has failed. A lot of these appliances have the ability to where they can serve as a temporary storage. So I'm not even doing a restore as much as I can just point that server to look at that data instead and be able to run. Now, will there be a degradation in speed? Probably, because that's not what it's designed for, and this is not a permanent solution. It's a temporary, but that might be enough to get me over the hump,
Right.
you know, so that I can look up that key piece of data that I need.
And replace the hard drive.
Yeah, while I'm working, you know, while simultaneously I'm working on getting that replacement in so that I can then do a full restore.
Yeah.
But in that kind of scenario, that can really help my RTO be a lot less, because I may not be at full running capacity, but I can at least do critical things that I need to do. Some will even take that a step further, and that is they'll give you the ability that if you have lost your servers in total, you've got that data replicated up into the cloud environment. Some of these vendors will, if you have an agreement in advance with them, allow you to spin that backed up data, those virtual machines you backed up in their cloud environment, and be able to connect to it and do business that way. Again, there may be a compromise in the number of people that can get on. There may be a compromise in speed and accessibility, but again, it may be enough to get me, you know, over the hump so that I can, you know, do the critical things so I can continue functioning as a company.
So, and I know you mentioned that a lot of these vendors that do the on-site appliance and cloud replication will also have a process in place to mitigate for a failure of the on-site appliance.
Absolutely.
What would that be?
Yeah, so in a couple different scenarios are there. So, and I'll tell you, Josh, when we put these systems in place, we recognize just how vitally important backup is. So we take it very seriously. So we tend to put things in place, number one, that provide ongoing maintenance and support on those devices to keep them up to date and running, because systems change, right? And software changes, so it may need to have the ability to have software updates to support new backup types that are coming in. So we always make sure there's maintenance coverage for those appliances to keep that going. That maintenance coverage will also provide coverage in the event of that device fails, that they can send me a new one so that I can keep things going. Most of the cloud vendors will even do, in that scenario, let's say my backup device fails, they will allow me to put a new one in place and then copy the data they have replicated in the cloud back down to it to reseed my local unit again, so that I've got that local copy. Another scenario, though, and this is the one I think is pretty cool, is a lot of them will even take it a step further of, let's say I have what we call the complete smoking hole disaster, right? I've lost everything. I lost my main servers, I lost my backup appliance, all my data on it. So, you know, at first blush, it looks like, well, I'm back to the same problem I had before. All my data is up in the cloud. Well, how do I get it back in a timely manner? Because streaming that back all over the internet could take days and days to get it back. And most of the vendors will allow you to have what they call instant replacement in place, to where you have a SLA agreement with them that if you declare a complete emergency like that, they will take an appliance identical to the one that you had on site. They will precede your data onto that locally from their servers there locally, and then overnight it to you, get it to you in a very timely manner, so that now, you know, because during that time you've probably been dealing with, where am I going to move?
Yeah.
Where am I, you know, give me a new server, where am I going to set this up? But I can get it back the next day and have the ability to continue doing business.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty great service, that they would not only send you a replacement appliance, but with everything already loaded onto it. And again, like you said, preventing the need for what could be days of transfer time getting the data
Right.
down to the cloud or from the cloud to your on-premise location. So while we're talking speed to recovery, we talked through multiple types of backup solutions, the physical media and things like that. When we're talking speed to recovery, or the RTO, the recovery time objective,
Right.
what are the fastest ways to get back up and running?
Sure. And so when we're talking specifically about RTO, if we're talking about the fastest ways of all, if we're having a discussion purely in the backup realm, then we've kind of covered it. But the scenario I told you just now about having a company ship me my data back overnight, well, that's still probably a 24-hour period.
Mm-hmm.
What if I, as a business owner, will say, that's not good enough? I can't be down today because I lose, X number of dollars per hour that I'm down. Well, then we start to transition into more than just a backup discussion. Now we're talking about more fully a DR discussion. And DR has more into play into it than just backup. Now we're talking about redundancy of systems and sites to house those systems. So yeah, I mean, if your business has a true need for, I need RTO to be 0, then you really need to be looking at redundant sites, whether they be sites that you own or whether they be sites that you lease, from a cloud provider, and you've thought through how that access will work. Mm-hmm. Whether it be a virtual private network or some methodology so that your users, your employees can actually get to that data. I think I said this back in episode 1 of our backup things. RPO, particularly with the type that we talked about today, the appliance thing, I can get that recovery point down very low. I can make it even less than 24 hours because I can be taking backups throughout the day. Mm-hmm. It's particularly for file shares and SQL databases, I can do an hourly backup and do it very quickly. So we can really get that RPO very close to 0 without too much more money. Mm-hmm. That recovery time, though, if you need that to be 0, there's a lot more than just my backup that I've got to take into account.
I know over the years, as the IT industry has, technology continues to advance, the IT consulting and strategies continue to mature, and I think this is where you were heading with talking about the overall DR strategy. Now part of that discussion is referred to as high availability,
right,
or HA, and oftentimes in IT those are sort of lumped together, DR and HA. Can you just talk quickly about high availability? I mean, that may be a topic for a whole nother episode, but what is high availability, and how does that compare with a backup strategy?
Yeah, so high availability is the idea that, and again, we don't want to confuse the two, right? But high availability is the idea that not only am I not affected as much by disasters, I said as much because it's hard not to be affected by a disaster.
Yeah.
That's why it's called a disaster. High availability mitigates against disasters. It can also just mitigate against maintenance features because, we all know that these IT systems, they have to be worked on, mm-hmm. patches have to be applied, dust has to be cleaned out of them. There's things like that.
Sure.
With an HA solution in place, you can have multiple systems that are doing, the formula is N+1, N being what does it take in order to run my system, and then I've got that +1 out there, or it might be more than 1, mm-hmm. That'll allow me to shift those workloads off to that other site while I do maintenance on this machine, and I still have high availability so that anyone can continue to access my systems.
So you're essentially moving beyond backing up data in case of a need to recover or restore from a previous point.
Right.
And you're getting into the discussion of if we need to upgrade our systems or whatever it may be, that there is a backup system, not backup data, but a backup system in place that can run
Right.
while the other primary system is down for whatever reason, down because of a disaster, unplanned downtime, or down
Right.
for maintenance, planned downtime. I guess the goal there is neither affects your ability to continually operate.
Yeah, and again, that goes back to, a dollars and cents discussion among management is, what's the cost of downtime? What does it cost us to be down? And a lot of business can quantify that. For every hour that we're down, how much does that cost us in terms of money or in terms of customer service? If you get into the medical field, what does that cost in terms of human care, being able to care for our patients if we're down?
Yeah. So with the solution we've discussed, the appliance on premise that is serving as a backup, an on-site backup replicated to the cloud. When you're talking financial investment, where does that recommended solution fall? And I assume there's variables that can change the cost, but is that a very expensive solution? Is it a somewhat expensive solution? Is it an inexpensive solution? What would you say?
I would say, a few years ago, I would be labeling it as an expensive solution. I will tell you, just within the last, 12 to 24 months, it's gotten a whole lot more affordable, particularly because a lot of the vendors now will do this as an operational cost, to where you can actually sign up for backup as a service, so that I'm not having to do this capital expenditures, and I can pay a flat monthly fee that will cover all aspects of my backup, including the appliance itself, the replication, the maintenance support behind it, the instant replacement. All those things can be done as a service. How much does that cost? Well, it's going to be relative to the amount of data that you have. But I've seen businesses now that are easily under a couple $100 a month, because they don't have all that much data to back up.
Sure.
So that scales up. It can scale up in hundreds and up into four figures, but it's not a 5 and 6 figure discussion like it used to have been.
Yeah, which is a major shift. And I would assume some of the factors that have played into that cost decrease is competition in the market.
Absolutely.
There are more vendors, there are more solutions out there today than there ever have been to do this type of service. And I know, we're not really promoting a particular vendor in this discussion, but we have partnerships with multiple vendors that would provide this type of solution in different scenarios. And I'm not in sales or on the technical side, so I don't really know what the differentiation points are between each one and why one might be better than the other in certain scenarios, but I'm sure that's part of what's uncovered when you're working with our customers, consulting as a VCIO, and when our technical team gets engaged, scoping out projects such as an implementation of a backup solution.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of discussion goes into, what are your backup sources? I think the big one is always, well, how much data do you have to back up?
Yeah.
Again, it all starts with what we talked about in the first in this series. It's RPOs, it's RTO, replication point objective, replication time objective, and retention periods. Let's start by defining those. From there, the discussion flows pretty easily.
Yeah. And I think this might be a good time to mention that InfoSystems does a free upfront assessment.
Sure.
To help a company understand, okay, how much data. I guess you would map out the sources, the amount of data, and do some initial strategy around what an effective backup would look like for that company, free of charge, and there's really no obligation at that point. The only cost to them would be when they decide to move forward implementing a backup solution. But absolutely no reason why a company in our area would not take advantage of something like that and have the right types of experts come in for no charge, and at least give them the information that they need to determine, okay, how much is this type of solution going to cost, or different types of solution going to cost. And I would assume you also help them determine what their cost of downtime and things like that could be if they're having trouble arriving at some of those scenarios.
Try to ask the right questions to help them move in that direction.
And our company, InfoSystems, deals with, we're kind of a cross-industry provider. We don't really specialize in any particular vertical industry, so from local professional offices like lawyers and insurance and financial, and to manufacturing and distribution and everything in between, we've done work in their sector and probably know it pretty well. And I would say in your career with InfoSystems, so you've been here from the beginning of the company, you've probably worked personally with pretty much companies in every type of sector.
Yeah, it's the fun part of my job is just getting to learn so much about, I think hardly a week goes by that I don't get to visit some new company and just find out, what makes them tick and what they do, and I'm amazed at the specializations that are out there, that, what they make, how they help service their customers. It's just it's a lot of fun for me.
Okay, so I'm out of questions for this, which I guess is a good sign. We had a good discussion, but are there any last topics or items that you would like to toss in today about this, maybe this recommended solution or backups in general, since this is our last episode on that topic?
Yeah, I think the main thing is I can't underscore enough just how important a topic it is to take some time to think about your backup strategy in particular, your DR as a whole, because the truth of the matter is something at some point in your business's life is going to fail. Whether it be hardware, whether it be an employee that's made a mistake, whether it be a natural disaster, something's going to happen. I don't know when, I don't know what degree it's going to be, and it's going to cause some pain for you if you don't deal with these type of things. So I can't overstress that, that it's time well spent to look at putting protections in place, just for your own livelihood and for the livelihood of your employees.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought this may also be a good time to bring up the fact that on the InfoSystems website, you may not even know this, but there is a mechanism in place on our website where people can submit questions or suggestions based on the conversations we're having on the podcast and route those directly to you. So from the InfoSystems homepage, there's actually some little icons on the sidebar of our website that has my face and your face and Scott Davis's face, because we're the three main personalities on these podcasts and having these discussions. But each of us has our own page on the website with a list of the podcasts that we've participated in, and there's a link on there to submit a question or suggestion. So I would like to encourage people to engage with
absolutely.
Both myself and Aaron. Submit a question, submit a suggestion, or if you want to just reach out to talk about setting up a free assessment like we've mentioned, then that's something that can easily be put into place.
Yeah, and to the degree of, if you have a topic that you'd like for us to cover in one of these future sessions, we'd love to hear that.
Absolutely. The best topics are the ones that
absolutely
people want to hear, not the ones that we think they want to hear.
Right.
So,
what's relevant to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, well, thanks for a great episode today, Aaron, and we'll record again next time.
All right, thanks, Josh.